Jonas Gutierrez, the betrayal that fueled a miracle. September 2013. After months of pain, an ultrasound revealed the truth. Jonas Gutierrez had testicular cancer. Surgery was scheduled immediately. Newcastle United's response? Nothing. No financial support, no follow-up. He paid for his own surgery in Argentina, flew home alone, and returned to England 1 month later, ready to fight his way back. That's when manager Alan Pardew called him in. "You're surplus to requirements. Find another club." 6 weeks post-surgery, cancer survivor, and they wanted him gone. But the real betrayal was still to come. Summer 2014, the cancer returned. Chemotherapy began, the brutal kind where your hair falls out and standing upright feels impossible. And for months, his phone stayed silent. No calls from Pardew, no messages from directors, nothing. Just cold, calculated silence, while their player fought for his life in Argentina. To understand this cruelty, you need to know who Gutierrez was to Newcastle. He'd signed from Mallorca, and the Geordie faithful embraced him instantly. For years, he gave everything: relentless energy, Spider-Man celebrations, unwavering commitment. When Newcastle were relegated, he stayed when others fled. When bigger clubs came calling, he refused. He'd found home. That loyalty meant nothing. After surgery, Newcastle viewed him as damaged goods. In December 2013, Pardew told him to leave. In January 2014, they loaned him to Norwich, getting him out of sight. When the cancer returned that summer and chemotherapy began, the silence became deafening. Not one check-in, not one message, just institutional abandonment. Here's where it gets darker. When Gutierrez clawed his way back to fitness, Newcastle didn't celebrate. Instead, they systematically limited his appearances, deliberately managing game time to prevent triggering an automatic contract extension. Cold, calculated, institutional cruelty disguised as business. March 4th, 2015. 17 months after diagnosis, Gutierrez returned as a substitute against Manchester United at St James's Park. 50,000 fans erupted in a standing ovation lasting minutes. Even opposing supporters applauded. This wasn't just a comeback, this was defiance incarnate. Then came May 24th, 2015. Final day. Newcastle faced West Ham in a relegation decider. One result determined everything: survival or catastrophe. Gutierrez started. The man they'd written off was in the first 11 for the biggest match of the season. 54 minutes in, he crossed from the left. Moussa Sissoko rose between two defenders and headed home. The stadium erupted. Then, with 5 minutes remaining, he scored. A deflected strike from 25 yards, the goal that guaranteed survival. He sprinted the length of the pitch, ripped his shirt over his head, and cupped his ears toward the director's box, staring directly at the executives who'd abandoned him, who'd manipulated his playing time, who'd treated him like a contract problem instead of a human being fighting for his life. Defiance, vindication, a middle finger delivered before 52,000 witnesses. After the final whistle, Gutierrez addressed the crowd from the center circle, voice cracking as they chanted his name. He told them he loved them, thanked them for never abandoning him when the club had. It was his final appearance in a Newcastle shirt. Days later, the club released him via text message. In April 2016, Gutierrez sued Newcastle for disability discrimination. A tribunal ruled in his favor, finding the club had deliberately managed his selection to avoid paying what he'd earned. But the money didn't matter. What mattered was this: the man they'd discarded, the player they'd written off as finished, had returned from the brink to save them from relegation, then walked away with his head held high. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about trophies. Sometimes they're about proving that when institutions treat people as disposable, resilience becomes the ultimate revenge. Carlos Kaiser, the footballer who never played. In football, legends are built on goals, trophies, and unforgettable moments. Carlos Kaiser, he built his career on absolutely nothing. For over 13 years, this Brazilian hustler convinced professional clubs he was an elite striker. He signed lucrative contracts, posed for team photos dripping with confidence, gave interviews with swagger that made journalists believers. But the second coaches demanded he actually play, suddenly a devastating hamstring injury, or his agent would call with an urgent transfer offer. Calls he faked himself, right in front of staff, using a toy mobile phone. Zero match footage existed. No goal compilations. Not a single documented assist. Yet Botafogo, Flamengo, and Bangu all paid him handsomely. Why? Kaiser understood a devastating truth. Reputation outweighs reality when you control the story. Handsome and magnetic, he parted alongside genuine Brazilian legends. Romario, Ricardo Rocha, Bebeto, who vouched for him without ever witnessing his abilities. They protected him because he made team life better, smuggling women into hotels and unlocking VIP nightclubs. His masterpiece, facing inevitable selection at Bangu, he ignited a brawl with opposing fans during warm-ups, earning a red card before kickoff. When confronted by Castor de Andrade, one of Brazil's most dangerous gangsters and the club owner, Kaiser spun gold from disaster. God took both my parents, but gave me another father they call a criminal. I lost control defending your honor. De Andrade doubled his salary and extended his contract 6 months. 13 years. Multiple top-tier clubs. 0 competitive minutes. Carlos Kaiser didn't chase football glory. He engineered it through pure manipulation. The most audacious con in sports isn't fixing matches, it's never playing them at all. The referee who started the darkest day in football. June 30th, 2013. A dusty amateur pitch in Pio XII, a small town in Brazil's Maranhão state. What began as a Sunday league match ended in a tragedy so brutal it would haunt football forever. 20-year-old referee Otávio Jordão da Silva flashed a red card at 31-year-old player Josinir dos Santos Abreu, but Abreu refused to leave. The argument escalated into physical confrontation, punches thrown, chaos erupting. Then da Silva did the unthinkable. He pulled a knife and fatally stabbed Abreu. The player collapsed as teammates rushed to help. He died before reaching the hospital. What happened next shattered the boundary between sport and savagery. Abreu's friends and family, spectators who just witnessed a murder on a football pitch, stormed the field in collective fury. In an act of mob violence so extreme that investigators struggled to comprehend it, they killed da Silva in a manner too graphic to detail here. The brutality shocked the world. Police reviewed mobile phone footage documenting the horror. Investigations revealed disturbing details. Da Silva had been carrying a knife to the match, though authorities could never determine why. This wasn't organized hooliganism, it was rage without limits, a community's collective psyche snapping under unimaginable circumstances. The town of Pio XII fell into traumatized silence afterward. Residents too ashamed to speak about what their neighbors had done. 1 red card, 2 brutal deaths. 1 town forever scarred. Football has endured match-fixing scandals, corruption, even stadium disasters that killed hundreds. But that Sunday in Maranhão stands apart. Proof that when passion turns poisonous, the beautiful game can reveal humanity's darkest instincts. The Kidnapping of Alfredo Di Stéfano. August 24th, 1963. The Potomac Hotel, Caracas. Real Madrid's legendary striker Alfredo Di Stéfano, 5-time European Cup champion, football royalty, was about to experience the most surreal 3 days of his life. Di Stéfano wasn't just famous, he was the Messi of his era, Real Madrid's greatest ever player. His presence in Venezuela for a friendly tournament drew massive international attention, exactly what made him the perfect target. Late that night, armed men disguised as police officers burst into his hotel room, claiming they needed to question him about drug possession. When the 37-year-old Argentine superstar hesitated, they forced him into a car, blindfolded him, and drove him to an undisclosed apartment in central Caracas. Global panic erupted. Was this a ransom demand? Cartel violence? Political assassination? The The truth proved stranger than any theory. His captors were Venezuelan guerrillas from the Armed Forces of National Liberation, leftist revolutionaries fighting government corruption. They didn't want money, they wanted the world's attention, and they got it. Di Stéfano's face dominated front pages from London to Buenos Aires. Mission accomplished. But here's where reality becomes almost absurd. For nearly 3 days, instead of torture or threats, the revolutionaries bonded with their hostage. They fed him paella, played chess, dominoes and cards with him, discussed tactical formations and debated politics. The young guerrilla leader, 19-year-old Máximo Canales, apologized profusely for the inconvenience. Di Stéfano later admitted he feared execution at first, but as hours passed, he realized his captors were idealists, not executioners. They even let him listen to Real Madrid's match against Porto on the radio while he was held captive. After 70 hours, they released him on a Caracas boulevard, unharmed. Di Stéfano grabbed a taxi to the Spanish embassy. Here's the kicker. He played a competitive match that same evening, stepped onto the pitch against Sao Paulo just hours after regaining freedom. Received a standing ovation from the crowd, who knew what he'd endured. The kidnapping was real, confirmed by multiple investigations and witness testimony. But the bizarre civility of it all sparked questions for decades. Some suspected staged publicity, others imagined secret deals. Yet every credible source confirms the same bewildering reality. Revolutionary guerrillas kidnapped the world's best footballer, then treated him like a guest they deeply admired. Years later, Di Stéfano and Canales reunited for a documentary about the incident. The moment was tense. Di Stéfano refused photographs, telling his former captor, "You terrified my family. We have nothing to discuss." Football history is littered with corruption, match-fixing, even violence. But a political kidnapping where captors became fanboys, that's not just bizarre. That's uniquely, impossibly real. A moment when revolution and sport collided in the strangest way imaginable.
Andrés Escobar, the own goal that cost everything. June 22, 1994. Colombia arrived at the World Cup as favourites to win it all. Valderrama's vision, Aspria's flair, Rincon's steel, a golden generation carrying the hopes of an entire traumatized nation desperate for glory, for redemption, for anything that might distract from the cartel violence bleeding the streets dry. Then came the United States match. 34th minute, American midfielder John Harkes whipped in a cross. Defender Andrés Escobar, the gentleman of football, stretched to intercept, accidentally deflecting the ball past his own goalkeeper. Colombia lost 2-1. Their World Cup dream collapsed. Back home, narco-traffickers and cartel bosses who'd wagered millions on Colombia's success watched their fortunes evaporate with that deflection. In a country where football, organized crime and politics were violently inseparable, Escobar's mistake became more than an error. It became a debt. 5 days after elimination, on the night of July 1st, Escobar met friends at a bar in Medellin's El Poblado district. Despite warnings to stay abroad until tensions cooled, he'd returned home. Around 3 a.m. on July 2nd, he was alone in the parking lot outside El Indio nightclub when 3 men approached his car. An argument erupted. Then, gunfire. 6 shots with a .38 caliber pistol. Witnesses reported the killer shouting, "Goal!" mockingly after each bullet, once for every time the commentator had screamed it during the broadcast. Escobar bled out before reaching the hospital. He was 27 years old. His killer, Humberto Muñoz Castro, a bodyguard and driver for the notorious Galón brothers, powerful drug traffickers, was arrested and confessed within 24 hours. He received a reduced sentence and walked free after serving just 11 years. The Galón brothers, widely believed to have ordered the execution, faced no consequences. But here's what haunts deepest. Days before his death, Escobar had published a newspaper column addressing the criticism. His words, "Life doesn't end here. We have to go on. We only have 2 options. Either allow anger to paralyze us and the violence continues,
or we overcome and try our best to help others. He chose to go home, chose to face his country, chose dignity over exile. Escobar's murder crystallized everything toxic festering in Colombian football. Cartels laundering money through clubs, fixing matches behind closed doors, settling gambling debts with bullets. Over 120,000 people attended his funeral. The world recoiled. The tragedy forced institutional reforms that would take decades to implement. Today, a bronze statue stands in Medellin honoring not the man who scored an own goal, but the player who loved his homeland enough to return despite death threats. Escobar's tragedy remains one of football's most devastating stories.
Fabio Quagliarella, the policeman who destroyed him. Fabio Quagliarella was living the ultimate fantasy, playing for Napoli, the club he'd worshipped since childhood, scoring breathtaking goals that made ultras chant his name like he was the next Maradona. Then, the nightmare began. Anonymous death threats arrived at his home, photos of his family, mother, father, girlfriend, with crosshairs drawn over their faces. Vicious accusations flooded journalists' inboxes. Pedophilia, drug trafficking, Camorra connections, match fixing. His reputation imploded overnight. Napoli fans, once reverent, turned venomous. The club forced him out after just one season. His relationship crumbled under unbearable strain. For years, Quagliarella lived in paranoid terror, never knowing who wanted him annihilated or why. He changed phone numbers repeatedly, moved addresses, avoided public spaces entirely. Nothing stopped the harassment. Once, a coffin appeared outside his parents' home with his photo mounted on top. Desperate, he sought help from a police officer named Raffaele Piccolo, who handled cybercrime. Piccolo seemed like salvation. He came to Quagliarella's home, took evidence, promised results. He instructed the family on preserving fingerprints, handling threatening letters with gloves and tweezers. "We're getting close," Piccolo kept saying. "Just a little longer." For 5 years, Piccolo investigated. 5 years of false hope while Quagliarella's career derailed, while Juventus and Torino got inconsistent versions of a once elite striker, while Napoli fans branded him a traitor. Then came the revelation that shattered everything. Raffaele Piccolo, the trusted police officer who'd been inside their home countless times, was the stalker. Quagliarella's father, Vittorio, uncovered the truth almost accidentally. When Piccolo claimed he'd also been contacted by the stalker and then admitted he'd deleted the messages, Vittorio contacted police headquarters directly. Nothing. No reports. No investigation. Piccolo had been intercepting everything, keeping evidence to himself, fabricating updates, using his badge to access police databases containing pornographic material which he sent to victims while accusing them of crimes. He'd cloned Quagliarella's phone data, weaponized institutional authority for twisted, obsessive control. When authorities searched Piccolo's home in 2015, they discovered he was a serial stalker who tormented multiple high-profile individuals. In February 2017, Piccolo was convicted of stalking and slander, sentenced to 4 years and 8 months. Quagliarella could finally speak publicly, but the damage lingered. Years stolen, reputation destroyed, trust obliterated. Yet Quagliarella refused to let his tormentor have the final word. He moved to Sampdoria and resurrected his career. At 36, he became Serie A's leading Italian scorer, proof that survival sometimes means outlasting your nightmares. Sometimes the monster isn't hiding in shadows. Sometimes he's wearing a badge, sitting in your living room, calling himself your protector. Fabrice Muamba, the man who died on the pitch. March 17th, 2012. FA Cup quarter-final. Bolton vs Tottenham. High stakes, packed stadium. Until minute 41, when Fabrice Muamba just collapsed. No tackle, no collision. He simply dropped. Teammates instantly knew this wasn't a normal injury. They waved frantically. Tottenham players formed a protective circle around him. 30,000 fans watched in absolute silence as paramedics sprinted onto the pitch. His heart had stopped. Clinically dead.
For 78 minutes, medical staff fought to bring him back. CPR, defibrillator shocks, adrenaline injections. Nothing worked. The match was abandoned. Grown men wept openly. Strangers prayed together in the stands. Doctors would later call it unprecedented. A 23-year-old elite athlete at peak condition, struck down by a hidden heart defect, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, silently threatening his life for years. Then, impossibly, his pulse returned. 78 minutes after death, Fabrice Muamba came back. Days later, he woke in intensive care, confused, surrounded by machines and tear-streaked faces. His first words, "What happened?" He remembered nothing, just darkness, then light. Football was over. Doctors made that non-negotiable. But Muamba didn't grieve. He celebrated being alive. He became an advocate for cardiac screening, pushing for mandatory heart checks in youth academies across the country. His story transcends sports. It's about mortality, resilience, and the razor-thin margin between life and death. Muamba didn't just survive. He proved the greatest victory isn't trophies or glory. It's getting another sunrise. 78 minutes dead. A lifetime reclaimed.
Didier Drogba, the man who stopped a war. October 8, 2005, Ivory Coast had just qualified for their first ever World Cup, defeating Sudan 3-1. As celebrations erupted across the nation, Didier Drogba grabbed the television camera and dropped to his knees. What happened next wasn't rehearsed. No PR team, no script, just raw, desperate emotion from a man who'd had enough. "Men and women of Ivory Coast," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "From the north, south, center, and west, we prove today that Ivorians can live together. Please, I'm begging you on our knees, forgive each other. Forgive. The country is torn apart. Please lay down your weapons and hold elections." Ivory Coast had been ripped in half since 2002. Rebels controlled the Muslim north. Government forces held the Christian south. Thousands dead. Over 1 million displaced. Families destroyed. Drogba's unscripted plea, broadcast nationwide, replayed endlessly, accomplished what years of diplomacy couldn't. Within weeks, warring factions agreed to talk. Peace negotiations began. Elections were scheduled. A footballer had achieved what politicians and generals could not. 18 months later, Drogba made an audacious request. Play a World Cup qualifier in Bouaké, the rebel-controlled northern stronghold, instead of the government's southern capital. An unprecedented gesture of reconciliation. June 3, 2007. The match happened. Rebel soldiers and government troops watched together for the first time in 5 years. Former enemies celebrated goals side by side. Ivory Coast demolished Madagascar 5-0, with Drogba scoring the final goal. That match became living proof. If Ivorians could unite behind their national team, maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild their shattered country together. The peace agreement held. Elections happened. Reconciliation slowly took root. Drogba didn't single-handedly end the war, but he gave something invaluable, tangible hope that unity was still possible. He later said with characteristic humility, "I'm not a politician, just a footballer who loves his country."
Drogba proved football isn't mere entertainment. It's a universal language transcending violence, politics, tribal divisions. When diplomacy fails and words ring hollow, sometimes a goal celebration speaks louder than 1,000 treaties. These stories prove football is more than a game. It's where humanity's greatest triumphs and darkest moments collide on the pitch. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next one.